Okay, it is 7:03. Welcome to the Technical Challenge webinar for On Target this year. My name is Kayla. I'm one of your ACMs, and I'm also an RCM for South Metro.
I'm Justin. I'm your second RCM, and I'm also from South Metro.
And I'm David Jarrett, and I'm the Challenge Master here in Denver. So, and we're going to talk to you about Appraiser training for this challenge.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, so just to give a brief overview, we're going to walk you through the whole technical challenge from a really high level. There are basically 4 components that we need in order to be, or that a team needs in order to be successful. So every team, can we maybe overview?
Yeah. So we're going to be doing. Let me stop the share here, and so we have a bit of
An overview.
An overview of a little model of what the setup is going to look like.
So every team has to have some sort of aircraft that they're going to build and fly from any of the launch, from at least one time from each launch zone, over the payload drop zone, which is where you can see all these numbers here. And then they're going to cross over this landing line to get points. So they're going to fly their plane 5 times. 1 time from each zone, okay? On top of that, they also have to, while they're flying their plane, drop some sort of payload into the payload drop zone. So that's a whole nother element. And then they also have to have 2 team choice elements. In this case, it's our costumes.
And then finally, they need to present a story about a remote place. So that can be whatever the team defines to be a remote place. And so our remote place is going to be Mars.
Perfect. Okay. So let's get started with talking about some of the different requirements for the aircraft. If you have any questions, by the way, you can type those at any point in the question box or in the chat box, and then we'll get those and we can respond to you as we're going, okay? So just make sure to ask questions at any point in time whenever they come up. So the 4 big things, just as a quick overview, the 4 big things that we have to have an aircraft, we have to have a payload, we have to have team choice elements, and we have to have a story about a remote place. Cool. All right. So let's go over the aircraft, right?
Yep.
So what makes an aircraft?
An aircraft is defined in the challenge, which you should all have a copy of, as any aircraft capable of flight. So it's anything that can support itself in the air without being touched by anything else.
So it's all with aerodynamic forces, and so you can't have any guidelines for your aircraft for bringing it. It can only be supported by air. Is really what it is.
Yep. So what that means is when it's coming over here, there can't be anything attached to it. So we can't have something that's help guiding our aircraft when it's flying over the payload space.
There's a lot of definitions about how takeoff associated with it. And so as you see here, we have the 5 different launch areas here. And with the 5 different launch areas, the definition is that the aircraft needs to become airborne within one of those regions, within the region. So if it becomes airborne outside, that doesn't count. If it comes airborne outside over here, that's not going to count. It's only if it's completely contained within the launch zone and being airborne.
Yeah, that launch zone is just an imaginary plane that just comes up out of the floor.
And it doesn't matter. They could have a very large launch mechanism to launch their aircraft, and so that could actually be extending well outside the launch area. The only requirement is that the aircraft becomes airborne within the launch area.
For example, a little guy here could come, and he can take a running start to kind of initiate the process of causing the plane to take off, and then let go of the plane right here and have it fly. Like that would count as a landing, even though he started the takeoff procedure
yes.
outside of the launch zone.
Yep. And then the other nuance of the definition that you'll see is that over here on the far right-hand side is a landing line. And so the idea is that the aircraft have to come across and then pass the landing line. So there's no requirement that it has to land over here. So they could actually have the airplane. These are really sort of goalposts. Here, hold that. So the aircraft can actually just has to cross this between these two lines. Just imagine there's a big goalpost here, and the aircraft just has to cross that. And it doesn't have to land, it just has to cross it, being airborne. And it can cross that line any direction airborne, and it's actually just fine. If it comes out, let's say they launch it, and they come over, and it comes this direction and crosses over here, that would not be a successful landing associated with it. But if they were to come, and they were coming this way, and they crossed the line, that would be a successful landing. Or if the aircraft turned, circled back, came this way, that would also be considered to be a successful landing. It's just crossing this 20-foot line, just like a big goalpost for the challenge.
Okay. So as of right now, are there any questions on how the landing works?
And takeoffs.
And how takeoffs work. So for landing, the plane doesn't actually have to land. The plane just has to cross over that line. And then for takeoff, it just has to become airborne, so meaning touching nothing except the payload within one zone. Okay? If you have questions, now would be a good time to type them into the chat.
When do we move on to things around the payload and the dropping of the payload?
Okay.
So the idea is that the other thing too, actually, it's also mentioned that you can only have one aircraft for the entire competition. So you can't have multiple aircrafts, and so if the aircraft comes and let's say it crashes and becomes damaged, they can repair it and try to reuse it, but they can't bring in a new aircraft.
Even if it's an exact replica of their old aircraft, they can still only use the one aircraft that they designed in the beginning.
One thing that's different, so there's like this is, in this case here, this is our payload, which is just a big turret that we want to throw out. And so the idea is that the aircraft would be carrying the payload and then release the payload, and that would actually drop it, and then the scoring would be based upon the different locations where the payload lands. And the scoring, as you can see here, there's these different regions, and they score different points. If it's only in this region, it's 1 point, 2, 5, and 10.
3, 5, 10.
3, there's a 3 here, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's a 3 here. 1, 2, 3, 5, and 10. And the way the scoring works is, let's say, for instance, the payload is over here. That would only score 1 point because it's only touching the 1 point region. But let's say the payload happens to land in this location here, you would get the maximum point, the highest one, which is the 2 here. So even though it spans maybe multiple zones, they always get the highest value.
It looks like we have a question. So the question is, can the aircraft cross the line in either direction?
That's a great question. So they can cross this line going this direction, or they can cross it that direction. It doesn't matter which direction they cross it. And then like this here, going back to the payload, if the payload, for instance, lands like at this location here, you can see that it's overlapping part of the 10, and that would score. You would score that as being at the highest drop zone, which is 10. And so the way that we're going to be doing the taping here for the drop zones is that if it's actually touching or overlapping the tape, it's always you go for the highest because it's going to be on the interior side for the drop zones for the taping. So So you don't have to worry if there's any questions about is it on the line or not. If it's on the line, it goes to the next highest value.
Okay, so it looks like we have another question. Do they design the payload, or is that a specific object that we give them? No, so the teams will be designing their own payload. So teams can use any object, any one object that they choose. What they can't do is they can't choose an object that's going to break apart. Okay, so if this was cut in half and their design was that during the payload drop, this would split into 2 pieces, that would not work. You can only have one object that counts as the payload, and the team can choose whatever that is.
And they can have multiple payloads. So they can only have one aircraft, but they could have multiple instances of the payloads.
So they could choose to drop this for one payload, and then choose to drop an open paperclip for another payload. It doesn't have to be the same object every time when we're talking about the payloads. What's our third question?
Can the aircraft pass the landing line and come back to drop the payload?
Yes.
Can it?
Yes.
Cool.
Cool.
Looks like we have another question.
On takeoff, does the aircraft have to launch vertically straight up, or can it launch diagonally out of the launch area? For example, be catapulted out.
So all of the requirement is that it's completely airborne. It's completely airborne, all within the launch zone area. That's the only requirement.
So
it doesn't matter how it plans on flying. If a team chose to launch a marble down a ramp, and then right here it became airborne because the ramp stopped and it jumped off, that would be totally fine. It doesn't matter if it goes vertical or horizontal, as long as it's completely airborne within this space.
And if they wanted to choose to use a catapult, it would just have to be that it was completely airborne within that square.
That said, if a team chose to do a catapult, their catapult could sit right here. Their catapult can sit over this line. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they're launching stuff.
Yeah, so if this is the catapult here, this could be way over past the line. It could even be way over on this side. It just has to be that the aircraft becomes airborne within that location. The other nuance here is that you can only launch from each of the launch zones once, do one successful. And so, it's not that they can do all 5 from A or all 5 from B. They have to try to do, once they've done a successful launch, and a successful launch is that it's become airborne within it. Once that happens, they can no longer reuse that launch zone.
So for example, let's say that their plane goes up out of C and it just crash lands immediately right there. If they don't drop their payload, they don't do anything. So they lose all the points they would get for landing and the points for dropping payload, and they can't retry from this space again. However, if they were to have it on thank you, David. However, they're not trying from D now, and they had their aircraft, and they started the thing and just skidded through here. That doesn't count as an attempt. It only counts as an attempt if it becomes airborne within this square. So if it skidded and became airborne over here, that's not an attempt. If it became airborne before it even entered the square, that's not an attempt. They only lose their attempt out of the space D if they become airborne in D. Could you pop it up a little bit? They become airborne in D and then move out of the space. They can even become airborne in D and just crash land back in D, and that would still not count as a successful attempt out of D. That would prevent them from using that square again.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's give it a second to see if there are any questions, because I know it can be a little confusing. So let's hear. It looks like we have a question.
How many attempts does a team get?
So every team gets 1 attempt out of each space.
And so you can only do 1 successful one at every location.
So they get 1 successful. So if you have your challenge booklets open that Kate sent you in the email, it's on page 5 as a diagram of the outline. But you can only get 1 successful attempt from A, 1 successful attempt from B, from C, from D, from E. That said, if a team's aircraft jumps up and then hits the ground or doesn't become completely airborne and exit the zone, they can retry as many times as it takes them to be successful. That said, they don't have to land for it to be successful. So seriously, the only thing that counts for takeoff is if it makes it out while it's airborne. That's it. Do we have another question?
Are you guys answering the questions?
Oh, there might be some stuff in Q&A.
Oh.
I don't
Yeah,
see it.
That's from
Yeah, that's from Kate. Yeah, we're going through the questions.
Okay, sorry.
Maybe we should go through the score sheet a little bit. Do you want to do that? Let's go through some of the
Yeah, that
score
sounds
sheet.
great.
Yeah, so let me switch over and show you what the score sheet looks like from the Appraiser score sheet.
Yeah, you should also have a copy of this. It was sent to you earlier. So you should have a copy of this in your emails. If not, just go ahead and follow along and we can send it to you later.
Let's see, here we go. So what I'm showing you here is a copy of what the score sheet, the Appraiser score sheet looks like. And so one of the things to be clear about this is that as a single appraiser, you don't have to do every single piece of it. So you're only responsible typically for a few of the components here. So let me go through this sheet here. So the first one is around the aircraft. So it's going to be scored on 3 different elements. That's the technical design of the aircraft, the technical innovation of the aircraft, and the successful landings of the aircraft. And so, so technical design is going to be more about the reliability of the aircraft. And so if the aircraft actually can fly very successful and it's very precise, it doesn't crash, it doesn't break apart, it's very controlled, those are going to typically be where the design points are. Technical innovation is going to be on really the uniqueness of the method of propulsion, basically, for the aircraft. And as you can see here, we score everything on a 0 to 30 scale. And so you would look at the technical design and then score it on 0 to 30. And the way we typically, the way we give guidance on this is that 15 right in the middle is really what you would expect to be the average for like an elementary team or for the middle school team or the high school team to do, what you might expect that group to do. And then what we want people to do is then go up and down from what you think the average would be, what you might be the expected solution for that level. And we encourage you to sort of think about what your scale is and how you define, figure out your scale for design and innovation. But the very most important thing is that you actually stay consistent throughout the day. So if you actually score something, a particular design, let's say a hovercraft in one way, with a certain number of points, every time you see something similar, it should have a very similar point value for it. Do you want to talk about payload drops?
Sure. So payload drops, there are 3 components to this. There is the technical design of the payload drop method, the technical innovation of the payload drop method, and then the successful payload drops. So the successful payload drops are the things we were talking about earlier, where we are looking at this map of the on the floor and checking to see what score they got. So that's objective, that's a yes, no kind of a question. And then on the back of this, our little sheet, or if you scroll down on your PDF, you'll have like a little cool worksheet that will help you through scoring that.
It's on the other worksheet right there.
So back to the more difficult to score things, the design and the innovation of the payload drop method. Odds are the payload drop method is going to be attached to the aircraft. So in your brain, you're going to have to dissect what is the payload drop method and what is the aircraft, and keep those 2 things separate in your brain so that you can score them individually. So if our little paper airplane has a hook attached to it, the hook is the payload drop method, and the piece of paper is the aircraft, or whatever that situation may be. And these 2 things are going to score differently. So they could have their payload drop method scoring very, very high, but their aircraft scoring very low. On the same token, we're only scoring the modifications the team makes to these objects. So the team comes in with a hover, a drone that they bought at Walmart, and that just lifts up and flies and does everything perfectly. We can't score that for anything but their choice in buying this particular drone, because that's the only decision the team had made with their solution.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we're going to have to look for very carefully for this, is that you can only score the things that the team actually modified for their aircraft, or even for the payload drops and so forth. And so if it's, let's say it's a store-bought, drone, a toy, that would score very low, because unless they do some significant modifications to it, and the modifications are what the thing you would actually be scoring on. You wouldn't be saying, oh yeah, that drone is pretty clever, and we're going to start, to give that 20 points. It's going to be, they have to do some major modifications to it to be able to get very large innovation points for it, and even design points. The third element here is the story. And so one of the things is the dramatic portrayal of the featured character. So the story of the remote place is going to have a featured character. The integration of the aircraft and the payloads into the story. So if the character, for instance, is off, not connected to the landing area, and they're doing a big story, and there's another group of the team doing the launches, and they really don't interact at all, that would score incredibly low on the integration. But if somehow those two stories are connected in somehow, and where the aircraft launches and the payload drops are sort of part of the story, then the integration scores would be much higher associated with that. The last one is the creativity of the story, about one or more of the characters exploring the remote place. And so this is just going to be the creativity of the story, how unique and clever the story is. And then the fourth one is clear and effective storytelling. And so what you're looking for here, and they say in the cheat here, is you're looking for whether the story has a beginning, middle, and end, whether the story has an arc to it, and the story basically has some sense to it, and so forth. That's the story element. And then the last two ones are the team choice elements, and those are being scored. Do you want to talk about the team choice elements?
Sure. I was going to chime in that a remote place for story can be anything, right? Like the team can choose what a remote place is. A remote place could be your local Walmart, if that's what they defined as remote.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be far. It could be, your stomach.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So for this last piece, the team choice elements, each team will come in and they will have 2 team choice elements. And team choice elements can be anything that the team defines that isn't already scored. So a team can't choose to have their aircraft be a team choice element. But they could choose their costumes that they're wearing, or they could choose a song that they write, or something like that.
Or it could be their a prop element that they want to have, that they built, and they're associated with it. A background piece, the backgrounds and things like this are very typical team choice elements.
And the team choice elements are both scored on the same criteria. They're scored on creativity, which is pretty synonymous with innovation. So that has to do with how unique is it to the team, how original is it to the team. And then it's also scored on quality, workmanship, or effort that is evident. That's pretty synonymous with technical design. So it's how well is whatever they built constructed. So if they're building something like one of their costumes has a hat, it would score higher if they had built the hat themselves. If the hat has hot glue all over it, that looks very messy, that would score lower than a very well sewn hat or something like that. And then the last one is integration into the presentation. So some team choice elements that we see are something that's never ever referenced. So they'll have a tree over in the corner, but they never talk about it during the whole skit. And that's not going to score as high as something like a rock that has some central part to the story about that's the piece that they need to move on and do whatever it is they need to do, or something like that. How important is it to the story?
Any questions about the score sheet? And so typically the way that the score sheet works is that we divide up the appraiser team. Typically on like the aircraft and the payload drops will be one set of appraisers, and there'll be another set of appraisers for the story and the two team choice elements. And this makes it much easier for us so that your appraiser, you're really looking for, you don't have to look for everything. You have very specific elements that you're looking for in your scoring.
Okay, so if there are any questions, now would be a good time to type those into the chat. We haven't been able to see that since we've been on the screen, so we'll go ahead and pop that open now and see if we can clarify anything.
Yep. No questions so far.
Okay, so we'll give you a couple more seconds to fill those in, and then we'll keep on moving.
So the next thing I think to show is talk a little bit about the sequence of what happens and the different sort of some of the other appraiser roles that we have. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we do, and let me switch over to sharing here again, is there's the very first, when the teams come, they need to, there's the check-in appraiser. And part of that process of the check-in appraiser is they have this this sheet that they go through, and it's a checklist to make sure that everything's okay with the solution. I think the check-in appraiser is probably one of the most important appraisers that we have. They're the people that are making sure that it's safe, and we have all the paperwork associated with it. And so literally what they'll do with the teams is that the check-in appraiser will check off and get answers to all these questions. And a lot of these things, if you're going to be a check-in appraiser, I highly recommend that you read the rules of the road, because a lot of these things are associated with the rules of the road. So like, for instance, like no laser pointers or no combustible engines and so forth. And so there's this big safety list that we're checking for. Some of them here are like helium balloons. Helium balloons are going to be allowed. So, but you need to give them a warning about if they get loose, there's going to be team deductions, but they're allowed. Dry ice, for instance, are things that you need to look for to make sure that they have proper safety equipment for handling it, so they won't get frostbite and burned from it. And then another thing you look for quite a bit is the electrical stuff. And so usually if it's like low voltage or electronics, they're not that much of a problem. But occasionally you'll see someone come in where it's a lead acid battery and are very high voltage, or they'll hook it up to the 120 volts to the AC, and they're wiring.
Electrical tape.
It's a wad of wires and stuff like that. And so those are the things to look for it. And then the other thing that the check-in appraiser does is to read all of the paperwork that actually comes in. And so we have an example of some of the paperwork. And so this is an example of a paperwork that's filled out, that every team fills out. And this is really important for the check-in appraisers to read, because it's describing what the team thinks all the elements are here. So you can see here, like the first one here is some descriptions of what the team choice elements are. So it's really important that you make sure that these descriptions are very precise, and there's not a lot of ambiguity with them, and talk to the teams about what they are, making sure that they're very distinguishable.
It's very common that a team will come in and their team choice element will say, Jimmy's costume. And you're like, great, you're all dressed up in costume. Who's Jimmy? Yeah. So it's really important that you just talk to teams, and if needed, have them edit their paperwork to make sure that it's really clear, because the appraisers that are actually scoring are going to have 1 to 3 minutes to read this over and know what they're looking for.
And then sometimes teams will come in and they'll say things like, our team choice element is our teamwork, and you need to work with them to maybe make modifications to their forms here so that they're maximizing the points. Really, the check-in appraiser is making sure that that they're going to get all the points they can and that there's no ambiguity associated with it. And then the other thing here is that the other descriptions here you'll see is what are, the description of the aircraft and the technical methods associated with the aircraft, and also like what the payload is in the descriptions. And so all these things are really important to take a look at and to read and to understand of what they are. And it's very common for teams to make mistakes in these areas. And again, you really want to make sure that they get all the points they can.
Something very special that our prep area appraiser is going to have to do this year is when reading the paperwork, one of the questions asked, please describe your payload. And prep area appraisers are going to need to remind the teams that if their payload breaks apart while it's trying to stop, it might get a 0 because the payloads are not supposed to be designed to break apart. So that's a really important piece that you're looking for when you're reading the paperwork over is their payload designed to break apart? And then if it is, can you suggest to the team, or at least let the team know, that they might get a 0 for that and give them time to make those adjustments if needed. Or let them know that now is the time to make the adjustments if needed.
The next thing that happens actually after the check-in is going to be the timekeeper announcer. Mm-hmm. And so what happens with the timekeeper announcer is that they will announce the team to the audience, and then they will make sure that the appraisers are ready, the audience is ready, and that the team is ready at their end. And then they're the person that will start the timing for the performance.
This person should be super energetic, super excited, really just somebody that can get other people excited and somebody that's not afraid to talk in front of other people.
Yeah, and there's a script that we have, and we want to make sure that they follow the script, so it's the same, and every team has the same experience and the same instructions that go out. So it's not something where you have to figure out what you have to say on the spot, and there's a script associated with it.
Yeah.
Then what happens after the performance happens, the performance starts, the team will do their performance, and as appraisers, what you're looking for, one, you're watching for your elements and making sure that the launches are occurring, the story, you listen to the story and so forth. But the other thing you're looking for is just making sure that the things are going safely and nothing, that the kids aren't going to be pulling out something that's not safe, that they didn't disclose. So you're really looking for the safety portions during that time, and also for watching the performance. Then at the end of the performance, when the appraisers will come and start interacting with the team members. And typically it's usually like if you're scoring like the team choice elements, you'll say, hey, can someone show me, talk to me about the backdrop or the team choice element? And then probably bring the team members over to talk about that. There might be another group of appraisers that will say, hey, who made the aircraft? And let's talk about the aircraft. And so it's the appraisers will come in and they'll divide up the team in different ways and talk to them about the different elements.
Yeah.
And then after you finish talking, then you go, the appraisers will then put your scores in for the ones that are the objective scores, like the launches and so forth. Those are ones you need to confer with your other appraisers to make sure that the number of launches are correct and where the payloads are. You want to make sure that those are all of those appraisers working with those elements are doing the exact same thing.
Because if a team drops a payload and one appraiser thinks that it got 10 points because they saw it get 10 points and the other appraisers didn't, we always err on the side of the appraiser that saw it. So everybody should have the same scores. If a team dropped a payload and got 10 points, all of the appraisers should say that the team got 10 points.
That is to say that we always go with the thing that somebody saw that gave the team the most points. So one person says they saw it, it happens.
And then for the appraisers that are doing story elements and team choice elements, they tend to work independently. So it's not so much where you confer with them to say, hey, what did you think about that? Don't do that. Those appraisers should stay and sort of work within their own sort of rubric or spectrum that they're scoring.
Because what you find impressive in the integration or in the creativity of a team choice element might be different than what somebody else sees as impressive in the creativity.
And I can't stress how important it is that you actually try to use the full scale when you're scoring from 0 to 30 for all these elements. So if you just sort of come in and you score everything, let's say 25 to 30, literally what happens to those appraiser scores in the way that they all get aggregated, they actually will they actually result in almost no scoring at all. So we really use the entire range and try to go from 0 to 30 as much as you can, throughout the day. And I also like trying to, you can see something, you go, oh my God, that's amazing, I can't believe that, I'm gonna give that a high score. I try to not give it a 30 because there could be something that comes later on in the day that actually is, quite a bit more amazing. So you also sort of, as a appraiser, you want to sort of, save a little bit of your top end so you can really see some throughout the day, so you have room for really great performances.
That said, your first 3 or 4 scores you're going to hold on to and not send them off to the score room so that you can kind of calibrate yourself. So you have the chance after seeing 2 or 3 teams to calibrate yourself and be like, okay, the first thing I saw I thought was a 25, but then I saw 3 teams do it in a row. Therefore, I'm not going to continually score this 25. A great anecdote we heard was that one teammate was like something to do with airplanes and the movie Tom Cruise.
Top Gear? Top Gun.
Top Gun had just come out, and so everybody did the bit with like some musical thing. And so like 7 teams in a row had this thing. And the first appraiser percent that saw it, they all scored it really high because they thought it was super creative. And then they saw it 7 times in a row, and they're like, wait, this isn't what we thought it was.
That said, if you score it a 25, and you've already sent your scores to the score room, that same thing should get a 25 all day long.
Yeah. So if it was at the end of that set of 3 things, the first 3 are different, and then the last 7 are all the same, they're going to get very similar scores.
Oh,
Question.
I think that's sort of really all we had.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Looks like something popped up.
Okay. We don't all have to read it, I guess.
We got a great job. Thank you.
Is it from here?
It was from Chadwick Fleck. And from Amanda Marlowe. Thank you.
So one thing we want to sort of say, just to finish off, is that we're always available for comments, feedback. If you have questions about the challenge or for questions about appraising, there's always little nuances associated with this. It's good to, if you have any questions, let us know, or ask us those questions. We're here to help you on those things.
Once you've given it a read, feel free to shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, and that's it. Yeah. Oh, is there another message? Another one?
Will appraisers seek clarifications? So a clarification is a chance for those who don't know, it's a chance for teams to ask the international challenge masters, who are the head honchos of this whole debacle, whether or not their solution is valid in the sense that it isn't doing anything that isn't allowed. Like if they were to ask, like, oh, if I cross this way, like if I cross backwards or across the line, is that allowed to do? So if a team submits such a clarification, the challenge masters will reply back to them, and they're supposed to bring those clarifications to the tournament with them and have them be part of their paperwork.
And usually with the appraisers, we usually work with your challenge master at the site for clarifications. So sometimes even the International Challenge Master clarification response can be a challenge to decipher. So work with your challenge master, for your tournament, for clarification and so forth. Good.
Awesome.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you guys.